If you're like me, and you got no life and there's nowhere to go, then tune in to the Animation Truman Show. You'll be glad you did.
And good
If you're
morning.
like me,
Oh, it's
and
repeating.
you got no life and there's nowhere to go,
Awesome.
then tune in to the Animation Truman Show. You'll be glad you did.
Okay, let's get rid of that. And get out of full screen mode. Okay. Today is going to be about process. And I'm going to do my best to make the important points concise. It's going to be tough, but I'm going to try. Okay, and the reason I'm thinking about this today, I spent the morning thinking so far. Thinking about process. I guess I'll doodle while I talk about it. Thinking about process and examining some legacy code I wrote. Okay, so this may not be especially thrillingly interesting to you guys, but let's just take a quick look. Okay, so I'm coming back to this, and hopefully this will work. We'll see on this other screen if it actually works with the tablet. Doesn't seem to want to, but I'm gonna reload the page and see if that does the trick. Yeah, for some reason it doesn't want to work with my tablet screen. Well, that's okay. This is one of the occupational hazards of dealing with codes. As you can see, we're we're drawing. Let's draw a little picture of a bald guy. And I hit the S key, and I'm in inking mode, which has, if you look really closely, you'll see that there's a smoothing facility. And if I hit the A key, I can invoke my polyarc tool, which does this. Okay, so in the animation space, of course, yeah, I'm thinking about the software Alan Dan's working on. As far as the ability to draw and ink, you got to create a flood fill operation. But basically, if you're trying to create animation software, the basics that get you going are in this little cloud-based app that I wrote over a year ago. This morning, I was looking at the code and thinking about how one's approach to code sort of informs your approach to everything. And at the end of the day, what are we actually talking about? Good morning, Maria. What we're talking about is projects that are big and complicated. And when you're trying to do anything useful or cool, you're probably going to be creating something that's big and complicated. So what you see explicitly in the coding space that maybe is less obvious in the animation space is the tug of war between a high level approach and a low level approach. Okay, so let's draw a hierarchy here. In fact, let's turn on our charcoal ink, and so it's a little easier to see. So I'm gonna just kind of make a tree. And so let's just say you've got this structure tree. And in the corporate world, I don't know what we'd call this, some sort of flowchart or something, but the idea is to look at what we're trying to accomplish in terms of our goals and then break it down into its constituent tasks. And hopefully what happens is all these different top level versus bottom level actions, responsibilities, roles, tasks, whatever it is, all work together to result in something in the animation space which happens to fit inside a rectangle, which is characters jumping around and doing things in a way that's interesting. Well, it turns out that when you write code, you're actually winding up in the same place. You're winding up with a rectangle in which things happen that are interesting. It's usually comprised of buttons, and it turns out that in the web development space, which I've spent a fair amount of time in lately, you get the same thing. You wind up with a rectangle in which something hopefully compelling and useful is created, right? These things really are all the same. So what may not be completely obvious is what I mentioned earlier, which is the tug of war between the top level. Let's just put a node here at the top level, and let's say down here we have the bottom level. Okay. Maria identified a piece of music that was in your head. Oh, I've had the same thing happen. In fact, the weirdest thing I've had happen in recent days is I'm walking around the house, just doing whatever I'm doing, and I'll have a tune humming through my brain. This has happened a couple times just in the last couple of weeks, where I'm like, that's kind of a catchy tune. I like that. And then I'll go, like, what is that? Where's that coming from? And 2 different times that's happened where I've realized that it was actually a piece of music that I had written myself. Pretty weird. Okay. Let me just explain it to you from the code vantage point, and hopefully this will be understandable to you. When you envision a software application, you kind of, it's very attractive to operate at the high level. Okay, so we want to abstract things like really low-level graphic operations that happen on the visual canvas, either in a web browser or on in a window. Those low-level operations are not, they tend to not have a good correlation to high-level real-world stuff. Okay, so it's actually the whole reason why we call this a window. We call it a window because that's an abstraction that we can relate to mentally. When you are designing code, there's an incredible attraction to operating at the high level, where you visualize what the application is going to look like, and if you take the high level approach to its extreme, then you would use tools that actually allow you to drag and drop widgets into an interface, and you actually create the interface first. You're trying to create the user experience, and then you have to deal with how you connect these things together by having things like button clicks connect to events. Okay, and then that's kind of the middleware. The middleware is brokering the relationship between the user and the interface. Okay, but then what happens at the low level is a lot of code that makes interesting things happen. Well, the reality is that if you look at low-level graphical operations, for example, everything that happens at this lower level is in fact actually happening at this level. Okay? Because everything that you see happen that's cool at the top level could not actually happen at all if it wasn't for a lot of things going on, largely behind the scenes at the low level. Okay? So what I'm going to get to here before too long is the disconnect between the high level and the low level almost always results in challenges that cause you to paint yourself into a corner. Okay, so if you're dealing with a story, okay, and by the way, when I say that, I said in the comments the difference between the craft of animation versus creating a show. Okay, I'm making a really clear distinction between the goal as an animator of having being all about the craft of animation versus the goal of telling a story. These are both admirable goals. There's nothing wrong with either one of those goals. Okay, so last night we were talking a little bit about AMB animation, and AMB, his direction and his goal is largely about the craft of animation. Interestingly, I actually resubscribed to his channel because I do like AMB animation. I posted a comment on his last video just to see if the comment would post to see if I'm still banned from his channel, and it appears that I'm not, but I don't know. I might be. I probably can't chime in on a live stream or anything, but he was commenting in that video actually about how he had tried to. I think what happened. I didn't listen to a lot of it, but just a couple minutes. But it sounds like he tried to crowdfund some kind of show thing, maybe to bootstrap a budget to create the whole show, and the result was underwhelming, and it didn't really work out. And so he's kind of talking about shifting in a different direction. And I can totally understand that. I can totally relate to what that's about, because his audience, when you talk about the audience that's really focused on the craft of animation versus the audience that wants to watch a show, these are two utterly and completely different groups of people. It's a really important thing that we have to keep in mind here on YouTube. Most of the people who come to a channel like mine, or AMBs of course, are probably more interested in this. Okay? The people that ultimately will let's just say, perhaps metaphorically and perhaps really, in reality, pay my bills are going to be the people who watch the show and or are participating in platforms where the show is available to watch, some of which are ad supported and that sort of thing. But it's important to realize that this audience is orders of magnitude larger, for one thing, and most of the people in this group could not care less about this group. They really couldn't. So the problem we have on YouTube, one of the problems that I think, your guys like AMB, your guys like Howard Wimshurst, to a lesser extent guys like Ed Tadeo, who are kind of in the middle between the goal of creating cool stuff versus the goal of monetizing a channel, you find that you need to meet the needs of these people, while at the same time while you want to be great at the craft, of course, your actual driver is to create a cool story, and if that could be monetized, of course, that would be wonderful as well. But in practice, what most people wind up having to do is monetize this, because in practice, they're not able to monetize this. They can't get there, okay? These are two really, really different goals. Focusing on the craft of animation versus the craft of creating a show or telling a story. Of course, there's tons of overlap, but they are extremely different goals. So what happens is, let me show you a practical example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. Back here on this frame, I was drawing a picture of Mel. Okay, this is an extremely high level operation. Okay, I'm sketching it, and maybe I'll draw more animation keyframes. And the idea is to find the character and find the acting and the expression and the emotion and the stuff that makes it fun to tell a story. Okay? This is a very high level operation. And if I turn this into a pencil test, I have a really high level expression of an idea. But at the end of the day, we know that the marketplace, other than on YouTube when people want to watch a video like a speed paint or something that's like a behind the scenes, people like me really enjoy seeing this kind of stuff. But the marketplace doesn't. Marketplace couldn't care less. Is there a middle ground there somewhere? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But basically, this has no market value. Think of it that way. A pencil test has no market value, especially in isolation. Right? So you made something move and it looks really cool, and maybe that'll get you views on YouTube. But in terms of the ultimate high-level goal, I mean, honestly, the pencil test kind of fits somewhere here in the middle, because usually in the real world it needs to feed into something bigger, like a story. Okay, so in the animation or show development process, one of the reasons why I've kind of bounced between tools and I've really played around with different processes over the months and now really extending into years is because of this sort of tug of war between the high level and the low level. We get really excited about this, okay? But the truth is, This never exists unless you have tons and tons of this. Okay? In other words, how would you actually turn this, if this was, let's just pretend this is a pencil test and he's jumping around the screen and it looks good, let's just say. It's not even actually the greatest drawing of Mel I've ever done because, honestly, his eyes are a little too low on his head. And, you know, there's always things we can fix. But that aside, what does it actually take to turn this into this? Well, it actually takes all of this. Okay? So if you don't love the grunt work of inking all the drawings, compositing it together, painting the background, if you don't love all of it, then I won't say that you won't get it done, because sometimes we all in our jobs, you know, we do some things that we don't love, of course. But what's going to tend to happen if you're not being paid to do a job is that you're probably going to, at some point, you're going to balk. You're going to get really excited about this, and then you're going to get stopped somewhere in here. That's the normal case, I will say. I really, really emphasize that is totally the normal case. The not extreme, but the common, maybe, let's say, manifestation of that is the guy who goes onto Discord and presents something that's of this nature. It might be a still frame of an idea that they have. Okay. And I've talked about this a little bit before, but what that tends to do for you is get you a bunch of kudos. Oh, that's so exciting. That's so great. Blah 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 blah. But in point of fact, this really is not the top level idea. This is actually a mid-level idea, because it takes a bunch of this to turn this into this. You're not going to have a show, or the thing that's being expressed when you share your idea, you are not going to ever turn it into this unless you have hours and hours and days and weeks and months of this. So if you don't love this, quit kidding yourself. You're not going to create a show. You're not going to do it. Period. You won't. You will quit somewhere in here. You're going to get lost in the maelstrom. Now, what you might do is find some help. You know, you might put together a team. You might, you know, find some partners, people that really are so sold on this idea and think it's so cool that they're willing to throw in with you. Okay. In practice, that almost never works. And we know emphatically that it doesn't work. Why? Because when's the last time you ever saw it actually happen? It doesn't happen. What does happen is people assemble a team of people like this who are kind of philosophically down with the concept, because they understand what this is going to look like when it's done. And then everybody realizes, well, we can't actually move forward until we get some of this. This is not a bad thing. This is perfectly natural. So then what you're doing is you're using this to generate this, so you can then spend all your time doing this, which gives a final result that's this. Well, let's just, play the odds. What are the odds that you're going to get from this to this, to this, to this, to this? What are the odds? The odds are vanishingly small. Admittedly, here, I'm doing it. I'm trying to do it, and I am quite sure that I'm going to succeed in doing it, okay? But the main reason I'm going to succeed is because I don't need this. I don't need this, and I actually don't really need this either. I don't actually need the money. Oh, it'd be great. I could give more time to this show. But I don't really need a group of people, although I need a little help, like you yourself, Maria, doing some voice work for me. So there's little things here and there. But basically, I can go from a high-level concept to the grunt work. And what you guys see here and see me sometimes struggle with when I'm fighting and, I'm getting mad at Krita like I have over the last couple days, This is because the reason I get angry at my tools at times is because I'm so stoked about this, and I don't want anything to stop me in my tracks from doing this down here so that I can get to this, right? I don't want to be hindered. So that's why we get frustrated at our tools, is because our tools do sometimes hinder us. Now the reality is, let me explain how this comes back to the main topic I'm trying to explain today. When you in code, when you come to a high level idea for an application, let's say, or a show, or a website, or a business, or a relationship. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. In your heart and in your mind, you create a story for yourself. Okay, and the story is, what is this relationship going to look like? What's it going to be like? What am I going to experience? Now, this is not a bad thing. I'm not explaining this in a critical sense at all. This is a good thing. This is what we do. It's the normal human experience because we are trying to, because we get excited about the final results. I mean, think about it. Why would you ever visualize this in the first place? Well, let's just say this is a show. Okay, so let's say this is kind of an anime show. Kind of sort of like what I'm doing, or if you look at what Sifter's working on, or you look at what Amar's working on, these are all kind of the same things where we have this high-level idea. Well, where does that idea come from? Don't kid yourself. There's no originality. It comes from the fact that you over here you watched One Punch Man, and you watched Avatar, and you watched Futurama, and you watched some live-action movies. You watched maybe The Lord of the Rings, or you watched The Matrix, or some other dystopian thing that gets you inspired about really dark imagery like Death Note or something like that. You assimilated all these ideas, and then you formulated, and then what you did was you processed this database. Think of this as an inert database of information. This is not active. This is not active. This is just data. It's inert. That's why if you want to improve yourself creatively, the best way to do it is to just go look at cool stuff that inspires you. Because you're adding inert data to your database, and then what happens, the actual magic happens here. When you take stuff that's in your inert database and you start mixing and matching things and spinning it out into a new idea, and that is, by definition, the exciting part of the human experience. Okay? Well, I have a little clue for you that I want to really emphasize. I've mentioned this before, but in the process of making live-action movies, which I've made 8 of them, and I would say 3 of them are good, one extremely successful. The statistics are actually pretty, almost what you would expect. If you do 8 or 10 movies, you'd expect 1 to be real successful, a couple others to do okay, and the rest to be crap. That's pretty much what I did. Okay, that's neither here nor there. Got to be careful here that I don't lose my train of thought. I'm going to allow myself to pause here for a moment. Oh yes, this is what it was. In the process of making live action movies, what I discovered was, in conjunction with my friend Dan, with my friend Don, and with others, what I discovered was that if I put my head together for literally 1 hour, without exception, Maria, you and I could do it right now if we wanted to. If we spend 1 hour, we will be able to come up with this. I have never seen it fail. That it is easy. And why do I say 2 people? Can I do it myself? Yes, I can do it myself. But when you have 2 people, you have an interesting dynamic in that you've got 2 sets of these. Think about that for a moment. When you involve yourself with someone else, where that's powerful is that you have 2 of these that are now coming together, and that's what synergy is. And so this batting around of ideas between people, there really doesn't require any magic on the part of either of the people. Any 2 normal people can do this. But what happens is, just the fact that they're a different person, this database of ideas is different than your database of ideas. So therefore, when you assimilate them together, you're going to come up with something interesting. You can do it all by yourself, but emotionally, you're going to probably get more excited about this, not because the process of achieving synergy is something awesome or magical at all. I don't think it's that. I think what it is that it's very clinical. The fact that this person's bringing different stuff to the table than you do means that things are going to be thrown around that you simply wouldn't have come up with yourself because it wasn't in your database. Okay? Now, if you're an egomaniac like me, what'll happen is Maria will come up with some really cool idea, and it makes its way into our concept, and then I say to myself, oh yeah, I remember, I thought about that, way back when, and then in my heart and mind, I'm going to turn around and take credit for it. I'm only being a little bit snarky. I do have a big ego that I have to keep in check, and I do have this proclivity. It's a terrible thing. I don't ever want to do that, but I know, I'm just being honest here, that in truth, I know that I have done that in the past. Right? And so then I find myself trying to be a little bit more careful to fully acknowledge other people's contributions to my work, right? Work that ultimately has my name on it or whatever. But that's really just an aside. But so this can be a quite useful concept. The problem is, all you have is a concept, okay? And if this is correct, if the 1 hour story turns out to be true, and I can assure you that it is, then what that means is that this concept likewise has virtually no market value whatsoever. And I've told people this. I've had people come across my desk who want to collaborate on something. And the reality is that cool ideas for a show or whatever are a dime a dozen. They're literally bereft of value. That doesn't mean they're not of value to you, right? They are of value to you, and they're of value to this person. It's exciting. It's fun. It gets you juiced up to create something cool. However, and for me, because of the paradigm I bring to the world of animation, I can never forget this very important fact. This is basically useless. Why? Well, because it only becomes useful when this translates into this. Until this concept translates into tons and tons and tons of drawing your character, doing the ink, doing the paint, checking the animation, adjusting the timing, painting the background, compositing it together. The good news, friends, I'm going to switch to my front view here. Here's the good news about that you might want to really seriously consider. This is actually quantifiable. Just think about that for a minute. This is not quantifiable. If you're going to quantify it, the quantified value of this is zero, basically. Why? Well, because I just showed you. It only takes an hour to come up with. Any fool, especially if they put their head together with one other person, will be able to come up with a cool concept. And again, I've done it many times, and I'm telling you, it never fails. It's easy. Synergy is a thing. It's cool. But if it's quantifiable, it's worth, what is this worth then? What is this concept worth? I'll tell you what I think it's worth. It's worth somewhere between $50 and $200. Why? Because that's basically, in my commercial working life, that's basically what an hour of my time is worth. That hour, that I spent coming up with a concept is worth somewhere between $50 and $200, depending on, what I'm doing. Okay, like if I'm bidding something for a client, it's going to be, depending on what has to be done, it's going to wind up looking something like that. But that's just me. Your rate may be different. This, however, is of enormous value. We've run the numbers on Salt and Light, of course, and I figured out that a budget of $12,000 is actually reasonable for an animated 24-minute cartoon, which, by the way, interestingly enough, comes out to $500 per finished minute, which is about what you can get in the fair marketplace today for, creating a corporate video or basically anything that involves video and creativity and tools like After Effects and, your favorite video editor. Basically, all this stuff has about the same value, actually. But isn't it true, friends, that there's a lot of things between this high-level concept and the low-level grunt work that we are a little bit afraid of. We're a little bit afraid of. All kinds of things. I'm afraid I'll hate it, right? I'm afraid I'll hate this grunt work, which kind of happens when you get into one part of it and you either find out you're not good enough, or you're somehow hindered maybe by the tools. Maybe you don't know enough, so you don't have enough skill. If you get into some of this grunt work and you discover that you lack skill or you lack knowledge, sometimes, like I've kind of gone over with Krita recently, what happens is you got pretty good skill and pretty good knowledge, but actually the tool does in fact let you down. Now, it's not smart to necessarily fix on that because there's other alternative tools you could go use, right? But when you get into any of these, all of a sudden these turn into a negative, and everything about this that was exciting and easy, this is very important to remember, this is easy. So what happens in the real world is we tend to gravitate back to this. And we keep coming up with new concepts all the time, but we never actually finish anything. It's perfectly understandable. Well, are there some reasons as I said in the video description here, it's about process. Are there any things about the process that might suggest why that happens? Well, yeah, there are. What you see in code is at the high level, and I guess we'll go back to the camera view here. At the high level, it's again easy to come up with a concept. Not hard to come up with a high level concept. Well, the problem is when you're creating code, let's say for graphics or whatever, you have to deal with what are called APIs, which are application programming interfaces. This is the low-level functions you call in order to do the grunt work that you wish you didn't have to do. And normally it's very, very common to very quickly want to collect these into higher level functions that allow you to abstract all this niggly detail into a single function call. And it begins to turn the low-level API into sort of a mid-level language, effectively, is really what kind of happens there. Okay, that's not a bad thing. But let me get to the heart of the matter here about what goes wrong. Here's what goes wrong. The high-level concept, as I've said repeatedly here, is easy. Any fool can come up with a high-level concept, okay? What we tend to do is stay at the high level and create something that kind of contributes to the high level concept that is pretty cool. Okay, so if this concept was a show, then this might be one shot, or it might be a collection of 3 or 4 shots that makes up a little bit of drama or comedy or something that's entertaining. So we get this little idea that, this is going to work, I can do this. Now, at this point, you're getting a little nervous because you're realizing how much time it took just to do this, let alone this. Okay, I get that. But one of the things we bump into in the process part is we sort of pound out a few of these kinds of things, and then we realize that in order to not continually be reinventing the wheel, we might have to stop and come back down to the low level. Okay, so what does that look like? What am I talking about? Well, an example of that would be this. If I draw a character, okay, so let's draw an oval, and we'll just draw a silly little character. Okay, if I draw a character and make a pencil test. So this guy's moving around the screen, and he looks good, blah, 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 whatever. Okay? If I fully draw his anatomy and I animate, his arms flailing around, maybe he's getting in a battle or who knows what's going on. He's looking over at the major concept with a jaundiced eye. I don't get any reuse out of this. In other words, okay, so if I take, in other words, if I draw my ink lines over top of this, and then we see that in other words, the ink lines are baked into the entire drawing of the character, let's say. Okay. Then I don't get the benefits of reuse. So in the code analogy, when we do this, we're creating a reuse situation where we can call a single function that basically does all these things automatically. Okay. Well, in the animation space, we kind of have the same dilemma, the same choice we have to make, where if I draw the character, then at some point I'm likely to say, well, wait a second, if I took this right here and sort of save that out as its own object, well, it turns out I can reuse this guy's head in many, many scenes. And I've actually done that in the last week or so with both Luka and Melchizidek in the show. And it turns out that for the most part, this is a win. This turns out to be a win almost all the time. Because to a degree, it mitigates your lack of skill. Right? How many scenes in my show have I had to redo because I was in a hurry and the characterization was a little off. And so I had to redo the shot because my standards are reasonably high to where I wasn't going to be satisfied with the character that doesn't really look like the character is supposed to look like. So does it make sense to reuse this head? Well, if you're going to reuse this head, now you're in a different zone entirely. Okay, think about this. When you do your pencil test and you're just, moving heads around the screen and you're just doing frame by frame animation, everything's baked together in a single high-level expression, which is basically a bunch of scribbles. That when you play it, it looks like it means something. It tells you a story. But when you have a large-scale project, you begin to think about this stuff. You begin to think about the idea of getting some leverage by reusing assets. And now this can kind of go sideways because what happens is I say, well, not only do I want to reuse this guy's head, but I also want to create this rigged thing with bones and the ability to, I'm thinking I really want to get lots and lots of leverage, let's say. And then it's almost axiomatic that the very first shot you do using this rig, I hate to tell you this, but I've seen it happen, is that the very first shot you do using this rig you created is the one shot that is the exception to the rule where the rig doesn't quite work. And it requires modification. Okay, that is totally normal too. Sifter said, congrats for getting one ad on your video. I'm not sure what you're talking about there. I know for me, I did get one GoFundMe contributor, a whopping one, whom I greatly appreciate, by the way. Okay, so the question then becomes, well, what do we do? If you only do the pencil test and then you ink it directly, and then do the ink and paint, and so this little concept, which is basically one of these bubbles, it's a sub-concept of the bigger concept. If you operate, let's just say in sort of a flat hierarchy where you just, you create this as a self-contained thing, what you find is you don't get reuse out of it, okay? In other words, if the ink and the paint and the poses and everything, and if it's all, the extreme example of it would be you ink and paint your character and then you actually marry the character to the background so that the images of the background and the character are a single thing. And you have no way to get them apart again, let's just say. If you went to that extreme, you'd say, okay, I've got a shot that there's no way I can get any reuse out of this. Okay? And then you're in the same boat the Disney guys were in the 60s where they said, well, we really like what we did in the Jungle Book, so let's just trace it and reuse it. Let's take Baloo and reuse him in Robin Hood, same voice actor, Phil Harris, same everything. And you can always do it by tracing, right? And the tracing kind of does become the middle ground to getting from here to here, right? Because there's this middle level. So what's kind of the takeaways from all this? Well, number one, remember that a high-level concept is easy and has no value at all. That's an important thing to acknowledge. And if you don't have the wherewithal to do all the niggly little details that together comprise a show, then probably what's going to happen is you're going to become, at least the persona you'll adopt is that you're going to be more about the craft of animation than you are about creating a show. Why? Well, because it actually turns out this is a lot easier. Being about the craft of animation is easier than creating a show. That's why, friends, I'm trying to bring this around to practical realities that actually make sense. Why do we see on Facebook everybody and his uncle is creating a course on animation or composing? Well, I said this yesterday. It's because they're not making money animating, and they're not making money composing. They're making some, but they can't make a living. And so what they're doing is they're going out here and they're creating courses, and they're saying, okay, I'm going to teach you the and so AMB actually gets it right in this respect. He says, I'm not really so concerned about this, although I'd like to do it, but what he's saying is, I'm not only going to focus on the craft of animation, but I'm going to focus on it from an extremely narrow vantage point that focuses on the Disney or Don Bluth type style that was popular pretty much through the late 50s into the 70s, for the most part. And I think that's as a marketing position, that's a smart move. Because by focusing in a narrower target, he's able actually to find his audience. And so here's a guy that has less than 50,000 subscribers that I think is actually doing pretty well with his YouTube channel. So you have to respect that. But this is why we see the proliferation of courses. Now, Maria made the comment about the courses she's taken, like from Aaron Blaze or whatever, were quite good. So I don't want to decry the courses and assume that they're not useful. The truth is, probably most of them are useful. But doing the courses requires you to do something very interesting, which is you actually have to come back to here. So if you're the person who can come up with these high-level concepts, but never gets through this, then even if you take a course, you're not, and by the way, I'm guilty of this. I'm this kind of person too, where I would buy the course, and once I get past the stuff that's kind of fun and interesting for me, I might, I don't actually go through and do all the exercises and really do it rigorously the way I would if I was paying big bucks, say, for a college course or, something like that, right? Or if my employment depended on it. So if there's another takeaway today, it would be approach your learning process as if your employment depended on it. I'm going to approach it that way. It's not a bad idea. So that you actually do go through all this low-level stuff that probably you have a tendency to bail out on. The reality is, friends, every single one of us here are capable of every single one of these things. You can learn anything. I'm telling you. If there's any encouragement here, it's that. You can do it, but just don't have any illusions about it. There's a lot you have to learn. And there's a lot of mistakes you'll make, and you don't know what you don't know. So there's a period of time where you will be doing sucky work and you don't even realize you're doing sucky work. You actually think you did good work when it's actually pretty sucky work. And we've all experienced that. It's a perfectly natural part of the process. So getting back to the high level versus low level thing, the point I wanted to make about that is this. If you operate at a high level and then you continue to just do little toy projects that don't stray too far from the high level, in code, this would be the idea of designing an interface and then creating high-level functions. You create an object hierarchy that makes sense to you and it feels elegant because you're modeling real-world things. The quintessential example in programming would be to model a person. So you have a person object, and then the person object would have data points like a head and a body, and it would have functionality like, go to the bathroom, right? And we get excited about this because it's elegant. The idea that this person is, it's a code-based modeling of a real-world thing, just like this rectangle is it's called a window because it's a code-based model of a real-world thing that we can relate to. So we get excited about this. Now the problem is, in code, if you look at the real low-level stuff, which I called earlier the API, so this would be the functions that are like baked into the browser, like that you have to call in order to do anything useful in, say, JavaScript. Okay. Here's the problem you're going to run into. You're going to start collecting these functions into higher level functions. Okay? You will do that. What's going to happen every single time, I kid you not, is you're going to run into a powerful disconnect where these do not bolt together cleanly. And then you wind up with a situation, what I call it in code is that you wind up with objects that have to be constantly looking up each other's skirts. You have to give them access to each other's internal data because the high-level model that you came up with in your mind and the low-level realities don't actually match up that well. So what's the useful takeaway from this? Well, in the world of code, it's understand that 80% of your enthusiasm is going to be for this, but it turns out 80% of your time should have actually gone into this. In other words, letting the low-level stuff create the model. Don't come up with the high-level model like this. What you do is you say, well, based on the functions I'm having to add together to create a higher-level function, that tells me, I let the API tell me what the higher-level functions need to be, and then these begin to get collected together. And then with some back and forth, you evolve the model actually from the bottom up. Okay, so let's take this code analogy and turn it into animation. In animation, the high level thing is the basic concept for what it is you're trying to do. And then the mid-level thing would be maybe doing some sketchy pencil tests to kind of map out, make sure, just basically galvanize the idea. But the thing is, you want to be really aware that this line exists and you're going to bump into it. I've described it earlier. In animation, it's largely an emotional barrier because of this thing I described earlier, where you find out that these low-level tasks that simply must be done, either you don't know how to do them or you don't like doing them. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. When you're trying to compile a really, develop craft, be good at, a wide variety of things. So what ought we to do? Well, my suggestion is this. Once you've got a concept, and once you've done a little bit of fairly high-level work, like I say, pencil tests are a good example of that, to just galvanize the concept, drop back to the bottom and be very, very sober-minded, if you will, about what is really required of you. In code, this would mean learn the damn API. Really learn it. Really understand the API of the platform that you're coding to so that the mid-level and slightly higher level solutions reveal themselves. It isn't your genius at this high level that's figuring out what this needs to be. If you approach it that way, you're going to run into this barrier in a hard way, and you're going to get part way into the project and you're going to get stalled in a big, big way. Trust me, I've done it. You will get stalled. So it's not that the high level isn't good, but we've already covered it, remember? As far as creating stories, the high level is basically useless. Why? Well, because it's easy. Everybody can do this. Everybody can come up with a concept. Almost nobody can do this, statistically. Think about that. So that's why I say 80% of your emotion is going to want to go to the high level, when the reality is 80% of your work, your labor, your time really should be focused on the low level. What does that actually translate to in the world of animation? Well, it means you have to draw a head. It means you have to bolt it onto a body. It means you got to make a decision whether you're going to rig this guy up or whether you're going to bake the movement into the pixels. You have to make those choices, and then you're going to find out that sometimes you made the wrong choice, or it seems like you made the wrong choice. But you have to pick. But make no mistake about it. For me, let's go back to the beginning here. For me, what I'm interested in is this. The craft of animation is cool, and I want to be good at it. And if I can offer help in some way, I want to do that. But this is not what I'm about. This is what I'm about. And I don't want to emphasize the dollar sign in the sense of making money. I just want to say I'm about creating a show. So this is what makes my YouTube channel different from everybody else. Okay? This is what the people that I that are sort of corollary types of channels to mine, and or are people that I respect and admire, generally are not doing this. This is not what they're doing. They might talk about it or think about it or kind of sort of wish they could do it or sort of want to do it or whatever, but they're not actually doing it, and that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's just that's the reality. Howard Wimshurst is not developing a show. Ed Tadeo is not developing a show. Even A&B Animation Academy is not developing a show. They're focused on the craft, and in the process, what they're doing is they're creating fairly high-level expressions, which wind up usually being, fairly short YouTube videos that allow them to build an audience and then be able to, hopefully, monetize this. They're monetizing the craft of animation. This is precisely what I am not trying to do, and it's why my channel content has been a little more frenetic. It's why there's an Animation Truman Show. There's an Animation Truman Show because I don't emphasize the craft of animation, even though I want to be real good at it. What I emphasize is I care about the real world. What do you do in the real world? What does the real world want? The real world actually does not care at all about this. They couldn't care less. In fact, if you look at the balance between high and low level, as I've described it here, what you find is that the entire industry has recognized that finding this sweet spot between the low and the high level is in fact where all the magic happens. And they've gotten pretty good at it. So when you see shows that are created that are actually on television, usually they're not doing it the old school, A&B animation or Don Bluth / Disney style. Why aren't they doing it? Well, because it's too expensive to do so. What they've done is they've figured out that if I draw a head and then I store it in a library where I can reuse that head, but then I'm able to do things like deform it. And so I wind up with assets. I wind up with reusable assets that on a scene-by-scene basis are customized, but yet we have this library of assets. Now, have I done a good job of working in that way? I would say no. And the reason I say that is because, and it's improving now. In real time, it's improving. I'm seeing greater consistency across the board in the shots that I create because I'm finally doing this more. It usually, actually, stupid as it sounds, it usually boils down to reusing a head. Right? Because for me, the animation part, like bringing the character to life, I think I kind of have a talent for that. So it's not like, that's not really that hard for me. For others, it might be more difficult. I don't know. But, right? So, we all have our strengths and weaknesses. But I will guarantee you, if you look at the Dragon Prince on Netflix, I do not believe, you can be sure that the characters' heads were only created one time. And they're created as CGI models that can then be rigged. So what you do is you pay a really high price up front. I don't really have a good way to draw this, but what you do is you pay a high price to create the asset that is in fact reusable. For Salt and Light, I basically haven't done that. What I have done is reuse components like faces and occasionally full poses. But I can say emphatically that where and when I've done that, it always 100% of the time pays off. It results in better storytelling where, and this is just me as a guy that's a creative person, a coder, an artist, whatever. I don't like repeating myself. I don't really like drawing the same character in the same pose over and over and over, except to the extent that the practice just improves my drawing a little bit. So the practice part of it is useful for sure. But that's me, right? Why? Because I can't get around the businessman side of me that this is just what I care about a lot more. I care about creating something that the real world would look at and say, okay, well, that's an entertaining thing. And I recognize very, very seriously that almost none of the people that embrace this have any idea who the hell I even am. They don't care. They don't care how I did it. They don't care what software I use. They don't even want to know my name. They don't care. All they care about is they're watching the show and it makes them laugh. That's what the real world cares about. And now if you're a purist, if you're an artist, you might find this a little bit disillusioning, just like I find the proliferation of courses that I'm being bombarded with constantly on Facebook disillusioning. Well, why? Because think about the disconnect here. What it takes to make a show successful, you can tell yourself the story that this is why it was successful, because of our amazing animation. But I hold that that's really BS. That's a story you're telling yourself because this is what you care about. It's understandable you'd want to tell yourself that story. But the amount of shows that have become popular that are technically not particularly impressive, Family Guy, versus the number of shows that are extremely technically impressive that failed, they are both legion. The examples are zillions. In other words, it turned out that this person, what does the real world actually care about? Well, make me laugh and make me care. That's it. Make me laugh and make me care. If you tell yourself that, okay, you can tell yourself the story because it is possible to use the craft of animation to make someone laugh or care. Of course. That's true. You can. But if you take it to the next level where you tell yourself the story that the reason my thing succeeded was because of the craft of animation, I'll say that at least 99.9% of the time you're kidding yourself. Turns out that the writing was what actually made all the difference. Turns out the writing, and then you didn't screw it up at the execution stage. If you didn't screw it up at the execution stage, it turns out it was the story that mattered all along. Okay? Not the high-level concept. This is not a story. This is a concept. This is something you can come up with in 1 hour. Any fool can do it. I'm not saying it's not a cool thing because it's actually a very cool thing. But there's nothing special about it. Turning this into a story, let's forget animation for a minute. Let's just ask ourselves, what does this take? What does this take? Let's just say it's a movie for the sake of discussion. You're going to write a 90-page, 90 to 110, basically, page document. That's what you're going to do. You're going to create this. So stop everything, okay? You came up with this great concept, and you're all excited, and maybe you've even taken the step of getting a few compatriots. Where's that drawing? You've maybe gotten a few. I guess I can't find the drawing. Maybe it was this one, but you've gotten a few people on board with your concept. So maybe you've actually, I think I erased it, by the way, but maybe you've actually got a little team together, okay? So you got these people that are all agreeing that, wow, this is a great concept. Well, stop everything. What are you going to do now? This is the question. You really should be asking yourself, what am I going to do? Doesn't matter how cool my concept is, what am I gonna do? Because there's a lot of drawings of little heads that have to be made. And there's a lot of acting, and there's musical notes to write. The very first thing is you need your story to be turned into a script. Now, you could argue that a storyboard will do the job. That's fine. Do it however you want. Doesn't matter. But the point is, you've got to codify the concept into something that... And why do you need to do that? Well, I'll tell you why. Because what you'll find is there's also a disconnect. This kind of speaks to this barrier line again. There's a massive disconnect. This might be the most useful thing I've said today. Massive disconnect between concept and the grunt work. For this simple reason. No show ever got created without tons of this. But when you come up with a cool concept, the very first question somebody in the room should be asking and identifying the elephant is, well, what do we now do? What do we do? Who's going to take the first step? What are we going to do? Well, in the real world, think about what happened the last time you were in a small group of people, particularly if it was some sort of, let's say you were involved in a Bible study, okay? Just for, again, this is the first example I can think of that's like a group of people in a group setting where someone might be called upon to maybe answer a question. A college course, same thing. Classroom situation. The question always becomes, who's going to take the first step, right? We got this great concept. Have you guys ever seen this happen? Where you come up with a concept and then you bat it around with a few people and everybody's like, that's the greatest thing in the world, blah, 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 blah. And then months later, nothing happened. Well, why? Because everybody's waiting for somebody else to actually do what? Quite literally anything. Quite literally anything. What are you going to do? Okay? That's the question everyone is sitting around asking for a host of reasons. Part of it is expense. I don't want to spend my time and invest myself in something and then it turns out everybody else just sort of sat around and I did all the work, which is actually what is going to happen. It's just the 80-20 rule. That's what always happens. How many people do you know who were in college, who were in a lab, and they tell you the story of how in their lab group, they're the one who did all the work and everybody else just kind of glommed on and got the good grade because this one person did all the work. Well, guess what? That's actually completely normal. That's what happens. So ultimately, all of this stuff about stories and animation and high level versus low level really does boil down to the problem of personal responsibility where you get real specific about what you want to do. What is it you actually want to do? Do you want to create a show? If you want to be great at the craft of animation, then recognize that you're going to have to be part of a team, probably. Okay? If you want to create a show, recognize that it's probably going to take you kind of a long time because that's a very big thing. If you want to make money on YouTube, that's a completely different goal entirely, and it's a perfectly fine goal. These are all perfectly fine goals. But the key thing is you got to decide what it is you're trying to do and then begin to march inexorably toward that goal. And so there's a bit of a feedback loop here surrounding the word do, because what happens is you decide and then you need to get busy. The good news is this. There will be missteps, but for the most part, once you actually get busy in a focused way where you can say with confidence that the steps you're taking are, let's say, germane to what it is you're trying, to your goal. So this is what are you going to do in the sense of a goal, combined with what you're going to do in the sense of tasks. That's why it's a feedback loop. You decide what you're going to do, and that's your goal, but then you got to get busy and do something, and that's your tasks. If the tasks that you do are germane to the goal, you will always be very encouraged to discover how quickly you actually make progress. It's always really kind of cool and fun to discover that you will actually see things happen very quickly. Why do I share all this? Well, I think that in the YouTube space, a lot of us, we're really, if you think about the goal, if you took this curvature right here, this feedback loop from action, this is all about action, right? If you take the feedback loop that goes from a goal to a tasks, okay, so there's a lot of them. So there's 1,000 tasks, and there's one goal. So now think about the mathematics of that. This goes back to the little 80-20 rule I shared earlier. Of course this is easy to come up with because there's only one of them. It's one thing. This is not one thing. This is 1,000 things. This is 10,000 things. So of course this is where all your energy should go. Well, guess what? In the emotional continuum of our human experience, this is where all the attention is. Everything about social media and kudos and attaboys and likes and little hearts and little thumbs ups is all about stuff, for the most part, that's happening on this side of the line. Now, what we do here is we show this. We show this with all of the foibles and frustrations that can go with it, because you are fighting with tools at times in different ways. So the question one might ask yourself is, if you focus on this, what does the real world market think about that? They don't care. For the most part, they don't care. There's a very tiny, tiny audience. Hence, I've got less than 3,000 subscribers. It might be because I suck, or it might be because my content sucks. But it also might be partly because when you focus on this, you have really narrowed yourself down to a very, very small audience. The truth of the matter is, actually, I'm thinking out loud here, but the truth of the matter is, from the standpoint of monetizing a YouTube channel, what actually should be happening, and this again is probably the other thing I'm saying here today that's actually kind of smart. The core YouTube content should actually be this stuff. It should be, this is where guys like, I use the example of Full Chain Animation or Ed Tadeo, who create these short YouTube videos that really look cool. And sometimes they're just pencil test type things, right? But they look cool. They're fun to watch. They could be a YouTube short. Basically, most of the content should be here, and this should actually be premium content. This should be stuff people have to pay for. Even though it's very mundane, a lot of it's boring, but this is the secret sauce. Isn't that terrible news? Isn't that sad? The secret sauce that makes ultimately a cool thing like a show is, oh my God, the most tedious and boring thing to watch. Why? Well, because there's 10,000 things that have to be done. And most of them are somewhat mundane, even though for me, I do find them fairly creative. Right? That's why when I look at my life, and I'm being very truthful here about the way I view my life. Other than things like cleaning my house, I'm basically doing 5 things. I'm either writing, I'm communicating, I'm drawing, and I'll lump animation in with that. I'm composing, or I'm coding. Why? Because for me, those are the core skills that I personally truly enjoy. So anything that I'm going to do should really be distilled into some form of one of these 5 things. That's me. Now, you may be totally different. Everybody's different. But for me, these are the things I truly, viscerally just enjoy doing. I like writing screenplays. I don't mind writing, say, business plans. I'm very good at communication. It may not sound like it when I'm sitting here rambling on YouTube, but when it comes to taking, let's say, a high-level conversation with a new potential client, where maybe I know half of what I really need to know to be able to engage intelligently with them in order to identify their problem and help solve it, let's say. Okay. One of my talents happens to be that I'm kind of a quick study in terms of understanding like where somebody's coming from, and I find myself very, very quickly able to speak someone's language, right? So I get along well with a lot of different kinds of people, and I can usually, I guess that's probably all just very boring and neither here nor there, but the salient point was that if I'm not writing, communicating, drawing, composing, or coding, then the question I have to ask myself is, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? YouTube is actually a bit of almost a violation. I am indeed communicating right now. That's true. And I don't think I would share these ideas with you guys if I did not in fact care. So at the same time, I have to say, I'm just like everybody else. The truth is, there's an emotional dividend associated with the fact that, I've got the floor to myself and I can say whatever I want to say, and I think maybe to some degree people appreciate it, right? But I'll bet you this is true. Let's just say that's true. You appreciate what I'm doing and saying right now. You appreciate me. Okay? Well, that could be translated into I am valuable. Right? That could be translated into I am important. It could be maybe very erroneously translated into I know what the hell I'm talking about, when in fact I may not. There's a lot of people in in the social climate who position themselves as experts who literally don't have a freaking clue. And that's the people on Facebook that I pointed up earlier. The way that you know them is you look at their work. You don't look at their course, you look at their work. Okay? I don't care about your course on how to animate if I look at your own animation and it's just okay. That is actually, frankly, not to be mean or anything, but that's the biggest problem that AMB has for me, is I don't actually think he's that great of an animator. When he works within between a couple important guardrails that work for him, he's actually very, 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 very good. And he's been able to capitalize on that niche in a way that I think is pretty smart, right? But then again, you sort of look at that Naruto thing that we were glancing at yesterday, and it's like, well, I'm not so sure. I'm not saying I'm better, because I actually don't think I am. I think he's a better animator than I am. End of story. It's that simple, truly. I'm a pragmatic storyteller using animation as my tool. That's who I am. And because that gives me the opportunity to have the fun of writing it, drawing and animating it, composing it, and then coding. The coding in my life usually boils down to web development for commercial clients, and the communication part is pretty much YouTubing, live streaming, and also my interactions with my commercial clients. That's basically it. So what's missing from this story here? Basically anything that takes what I'm doing on YouTube and the animation stuff and actually turns it into coin. There really is not much of a model for that. Yeah, I've got a Patreon, but nobody's going there because I'm not offering anything of value. And here's the point about that. Whatever I'm offering that is of value, you're already getting, and you're getting it for free. I don't know that I necessarily have all that much more to offer unless I basically stop the presses and create a course, which I don't really think I want to do at this point. So, anyway, I'm going to go back now and I'm going to take a moment, just stop everything and look at the comments and see if anybody had anything that's, maybe worth responding to. And keep going to the process of weaving on a loom. You can't make the pretty shawl until you warp the loom. Oh, golly, Marie, that's so right. That's so right. And the point is, if you don't love the microscopic work of dealing with that thread, what the heck are you doing thinking about creating a shawl? Most of the time development is spent in debugging. I will tell you that that does not have to be true. The right approach to code can greatly mitigate the need for a lot of debugging, but of course, for sure, looking at someone else's code can be quite a nightmarish experience. Just like in animation or art, no planning or the best planning. You spend a lot of time bumping your head debugging the problems. That is true. I agree. If you're animating the fundamentals of understanding animation drawing, it sounds like you need more time to create rigged characters to increase production time and reduce cost. I would say that is true. I think you've got a good observation there. I'm seeing the reuse, and I'm starting to see the light potentially here in Blender in the sense that, I'm glad you said that, Amar. If I, okay, so let's just take the oval that turns into a head. Now, if I ink this guy, and I ink it on a different layer, okay? There's a point, and I'm putting the neck in there for a reason. There's a point where I realize that grabbing this and saving it as an object that can be reused later is a huge win for me. Going to the point of rigging, I'm not sure about, because I think it would be fun to do. It would be interesting and fun to do, but I think what would happen is, number one, the aesthetic of the show would probably change because I'd be doing more of the 3/4 view, and rigged animation is usually pretty easy to identify. So it's a palpable change stylistically that you don't really bump into so much when you're just reusing like faces. The sweet spot for me, and this is again the reason why I'm in Blender now, the sweet spot for me, I would say, is this fluid process that I'm really finding myself enjoying, where I can go from drawing to instantly sculpting, and if I'm sculpting, then I'm acting. You know, now I'm kind of going like this, and now we actually can see the guy move. And this ability to operate at a pretty high level, but then occasionally go back to some of these still frames and start to build up a bit of that library, that's where I'm kind of seeing the sweet spot. There's a sweet spot there. So I definitely see rigging as a wonderful tool, but more in the sense of taking an asset like this and just instantly using deformation to get the look that you get with a fully realized rig without necessarily having to go through all the setup time. I think for me that's the sweet spot. Sounds like you need more time. Which software is your favorite of all time? Goswami. Actually, I can say Blender because Blender I've used for 20 years. So Blender is my favorite because I've kept coming back to it for decades. It's not terrible. That's what everyone's doing, subscriber-only content, right? All the behind-the-scenes stuff is generally a paywall for social media content creators. Yes. I found a lot of channels doing rigged character in Blender that does not at all use lattices. Doing some really cool things in that area with GP. Do plan on working on that at some point this year for one of my other show ideas. Okay. All right. I am going to, I think we're good. It's been an hour and a half. I'm going to sign off. I'm going to just briskly sign off here because I may be back on in a little while actually working on some animation stuff. But these were just things I wanted to share today. I don't know why. I don't know why. But if there's a takeaway that has to do with me and what I'm doing here, the bottom line is this. I care about storytelling. Animation's cool. Let's be good at it. But what I care about is storytelling. Whatever it takes to tell a good story. I want to be pragmatic. Full chain. I'm about to sign off, buddy. I'm glad to see you, and I see you got your live streaming working. But I'm going to sign off, and I may be back on here a little later this afternoon or whatever, doing some animation stuff. So, and thank you, Maria. I appreciate it. Love you. I will see you guys later. There will be